Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear program a pivot of history. He also said Israel is close to achieving its military goals against Iran.
Now President Trump is suggesting there could be a regime change in Tehran. Chris Mitchell has more from Jerusalem.
Defense officials detailed the attack, which was the largest B-2 bomber operation in history and the first use of the 15-ton massive ordnance penetrator, a bunker-busting bomb capable of penetrating deep underground.
At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped two GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Fordow. As the president stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against two nuclear target areas.
The scope and scale of what occurred last night would take the breath away of almost any American if you had an opportunity to watch it in real time. Planes flew from the middle of America in Missouri overnight, completely undetected over three of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities. And our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now.
Before and after satellite images show the destruction to all three sites, but there are concerns Iran might have moved some of the enriched uranium beforehand.
Just hours after the U.S. hit the nuclear sites at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, this was the answer of the Islamic regime. A barrage of about 25 missiles. This one hit north of Tel Aviv. Thankfully, no fatalities, but about 20 injuries, and you can see the damage behind me.
Unfortunately, we're talking about a continuous pattern of the Iranian barrage of missiles targeting our civilian communities. The threat of Iran and that regime is not just a threat against Israel. It's a threat against all Western ideology, a regime that calls for the death of Israel, but also the death of the United States. We're in this together.
We're not at war with Iran. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program.
Vice President J.D. Vance told NBC News the U.S. wants Iran to return to the negotiating table to seek peace.
What we've said to the Iranians is we do not want war with Iran. We actually want peace. But we want peace in the context of them not having a nuclear weapons program, and that's exactly what the president accomplished last night.
But later on Truth Social, President Trump posted this. It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MAGA or Make Iran Great Again. Iran's foreign minister says the time for diplomacy is over.
There is no red line that they have not crossed. And the last one, and the most dangerous one, was happened only last night, when they crossed a very big red line by attacking nuclear facilities. I don't know how much room is left for diplomacy. We are now calculating the damages.
After the strike, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu honored President Trump.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace.
Sunday, Netanyahu said Israel is now close to achieving its goals against Iran and won't engage in a war of attrition. Netanyahu also went to the Western Wall, saying prayers for the IDF, security forces, the hostages, and President Trump.
And Am Kelavi, come.
A people has risen up as a lion. We will continue to do wonders and miracles to ensure the eternity of Israel for generations.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Northern Tel Aviv.
Thanks so much, Chris. Michael Oren is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, and he joins us now from Tel Aviv. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Ambassador. Israel attacked the Fordow facility again today. What does Israel know about the extent of the damage to Iran's nuclear facilities and the impact on their program?
First of all, always a pleasure and honor to be with 700 Club. Clearly, if Israel is operating against the Fordow facility, that there's more work to be done. I think of equal significance is the fact that Israeli planes today bombed the notorious Evin prison. It's a place where thousands and thousands of Iranian political prisoners have been kept for years and tortured. And the Israeli planes also blew up the headquarters of the Basij. The Basij is the civilian thugs who, again, brutally oppress any domestic opposition. And finally, Israeli planes blew up the destruction clock. That's a clock that's been ticking in Iran since I was ambassador, well over a decade ago, that is counting down the minutes to Israel's destruction, sometimes around the year 2040, which is interesting here because it ties into what President Trump was saying about regime change. These are not sites that have strategic significance, but they have immense political significance. They are the pillars, if you will, of this horrendous regime. And by bombing them, Israel has weakened that regime. And so ultimately, the greatest guarantee we have for a non-nuclear, non-dangerous, non-threatening Iran is by the removal of the regime or the transformation of the regime in such a way that is not even recognizable anymore, which I think is rather unlikely. And so both the bombing of the Fordow facility and the elimination of these powerful symbols of the Ayatollah's oppression, I think point to a certain destination, a certain goal.
What would that goal be? You mentioned regime change, but what is the goal for ending the fighting? Can you comment on that?
But the ending of fighting is different than regime change. Ending the fighting could be a ceasefire that could go into effect today. Iran says it's not going to fire at Israel anymore. Israel has signaled that that is willing to cease fire on our side. And then I think the Trump administration would engage in negotiations. That is where the real crux is. What Iran comes to the table? Is it the Iran that remains the world's largest state sponsor of terror? Is it the Iran that finances and trains Hamas and Hezbollah and bears an immense amount of responsibility for the massacres of October 7th? In Iran that has been complicit in the murder of hundreds of thousands of people in the Middle East, thousands of Americans, certainly. Do we have that same Iran, or is there a different Iran that comes to the table? And is this regime capable of making that change? Because it is a jihadist regime. That's what it's about. It's in their DNA. Can that be altered? I suspect not. But since the messages coming out of the White House indicate the United States would be open to regime change, perhaps that means an altered regime, not just in its character, but in its individuals, in its personages.
So Iran may have some leverage. Iran's parliament has approved closing the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil is shipped. If that happened, what would be the impact for Iran and the world?
Well, I think that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has made it unequivocally clear that Iran would then precipitate a massive and immensely punishing American reaction. I mean, Iran doesn't have a big navy. It doesn't have destroyers. It doesn't have aircraft carriers. It has mostly speedboats. And breaking that blockade would be easy. We'd have some trouble with the mines in that area. So I think there'd be a disproportionate price that Iran would have to pay. The Iranian regime may need this for some face-saving measure before it comes back and capitulates at the negotiating table. And so I think we have to navigate, meaning the United States and Israel, have to navigate very carefully now. Because remember, our goal is, I think it is intimated earlier in your report, our goal is to truly remove the nuclear threat. And to do that, we have to remove the roughly 650 kilo of highly enriched uranium to 20% and 60%, which is enough to make between 10 and 15 bombs. And as long as that is not removed, and Iran still has a ballistic capability, and Iran still probably has a warhead somewhere, they could put all three together and become a nuclear power very quickly. That has to end. But my great hope is that not only the nuclear power, it's Iran that has to change. And if Iran changes, the Middle East can change just in unimaginable ways. We can have peace between Israel and Lebanon, peace between Israel and Syria, and who knows, someday maybe even peace between Israel and Iran.
Yeah, and speaking of which, this war is obviously far from over, but looking back on October 7th, 23, did you have any idea that that day would bring such a radical reshaping of the region?
I don't think any more than Americans thought on December 7th, 1941, what the next 4 years would bring to the United States and the world. Sometimes in our darkest moments, it's difficult to see. You know, I'm a military historian by background, and I don't think that Abraham Lincoln thought when Fort Sumter was shelled in April 1861 that someday there'd be a surrender at Appomattox 4 years later, or that when George Washington lost the battles of Monmouth and Manhattan, right, in 1776, that someday the British would surrender at Yorktown. It's difficult to see the future in that way. But look at what's happened. This is one of the most extraordinary military victories in history. Again, as a military historian, I will tell you we will be studying this at West Point, at the Citadel, at the military academies throughout the world for decades and decades to come.
Michael Oren, always appreciate your perspective and insight. Thanks so much for joining us today.
And your prayers. Thank you.
All right, God bless. CBN White House correspondent Kelly Wright joins us now from our bureau in Washington, D.C. Kelly, this military operation was a well-kept secret with disinformation about the president's timetable and diversionary flights of B-2 bombers. Tell us more about how the administration pulled this off.
Secrecy, planning, focusing, having years of practice and rehearsals to get it done. And when the plan came to the total creation and execution, the president locked down all of the information. Let's show you a map exactly what happened so you can see how this took place. Deception and disinformation. So the operational success was due to an operational security that was going on. They traveled west to Guam when they left the Whiteman Air Force Base. And when they got to Guam, 7 of those B-2s shifted and began traveling towards east to Iran, refueling in the air, flying into Iran airspace, and then striking Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo, and also Navy submarines operating near the Persian Gulf, firing Tomahawk missiles into nuclear facilities as well, and targeting Iran's nuclear facilities and taking those facilities out and actually causing a lot of damage there, dismantling them. We're still waiting for the BDA battle damage assessments to figure out just how obliterated they were. But the president is obviously very proud of the U.S. military and how they responded and how they executed this plan flawlessly.
Kelly, some Americans are now growing a little uncomfortable as Iran has threatened to retaliate. What steps are being taken to protect, the 40,000 U.S. troops in the region, and is there a threat here in the homeland?
So without giving away any battle plans, the Pentagon has stated very clearly through Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, as well as General Dan Kane, that they are putting all of those units on high alert. The president has warned that if anything is done towards any military assets that we have in the region, as well as U.S. personnel, I should point out that people are being told in Qatar to actually bunker down and remain very vigilant about their security. But if anything happens, there will be a swift retaliation. The president has said that they will unleash a force that no one wants to see because of just how volatile and lethal that will be. Here at home, we're obviously concerned about terror cells. We do know that a lot of people came across the border during the Biden administration. For anyone who's traveled to the southern border, I've been there. I've talked to law enforcement there, as well as security personnel and even people on the ground. They saw a lot of people coming across this country that look very much like Middle Easterns. So because of that, there is a concern that perhaps a terror cell or 1 or 2 or maybe more could be launched. And for that matter, then our law enforcement will always say, if you see something, do something, report it, being vigilant. We have to have vigilance on our side.
All right, the political gloves are on now about 48 hours later, and people are starting to rumble. Democratic members of Congress claim they were not notified about the attack. It's an unconstitutional act. What's the administration's response?
Well, I can tell you the administration, through White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who spoke this morning on another network, Fox News, basically stated that this is not the case at all, that there's a lot of disinformation going on within our own country, that the leaders, bipartisan leaders, were notified by the president and by the president's team that this was going to take place, and it did so. They had a difficult time reaching Hakeem Jeffries on the Democrat side, because he was not available, but they did brief him after that. They also briefed Senator Chuck Schumer. And, of course, they briefed Republicans. But as you've seen this before, there's a lot of blowback in terms of what congressional members think. One congressional member calling for the impeachment of President Donald Trump for taking this action to defend America's homeland. But the president is acting well within his constitutional rights. That's what the Trump administration is saying, and that he's acting within his Article 2 rights as well as War Powers Act. And he saw something that was happening, and most Americans are aware of the fact that Iran has always threatened death to America and death to Israel. And this was an opportune time for America to strike. He made the decision, having put out disinformation that he was only going to wait for 2 weeks, and he decided the matter in 2 days.
Yeah, and he said he would never let Iran have a nuclear weapon, but he also stated in the past he's against getting the U.S. involved in foreign wars, and now he's talking potential regime change in Iran. What's this shift? How do you explain it?
Well, I would tell you that regime change does not necessarily mean putting boots on the ground. He's talking about regime change within Iran. There are a lot of Iranian people. As this story broke, we were on air, Chris Mitchell, myself, and others. We had Wally Fares and Lana Silk. Lana Silk, growing up in Iran, knows that regime change is possible because the heart of the Iranian people, there are 92 million people in Iran. Many of them do not like this regime that they have been oppressed by for the past 45 to 46 years. And so I think what the president is actually stating in that post that he put on Truth Social is that regime change is a politically incorrect word. But if people within their country see a need for change, you could make, as he says, make America great again. People there could make Iran great again. And so that's the regime change that the president is referring to. He's not talking about boots on the ground.
All right, Kelly, thanks so much for reporting. Really appreciate it.